Ma'am, we have precisely from the first century AD onwards. We have precisely from first century AD onwards, and how these Sanskrit inscriptions idealize the existing monarchies and like the later Brahmin system.
But once again, if I may remind you, you can't generalize about the whole of early India on a question like that. There are different periods and different phases. I presume you're asking about a fairly late period when Brahmins were given land grants. Yeah, well, obviously, people who have access in an agrarian economy, those that are owners of land will have a very special economic and social status, which they had. I mean, their status anyway was special because they were Brahmins. And then they owned land, and that added the economic factor to the social status. So they did have a very dominant status, and they did play an extremely important role in dominance. Yet, one of the interesting things about Indian social history is that despite the fact that you had Brahmin grantees, given grants of land and therefore very well off, in most parts of the subcontinent, the castes that finally emerged as the dominant castes in the second millennium were not the Brahmins. There were other castes. Now this is a problem which social historians of the medieval period have to work out. Why is it that you have Khatris in the Punjab, Rajputs in Rajasthan, Marathas in Maharashtra and so on? They're not Brahmins. They're other castes, they're other dominant castes, who emerge as the dominant castes. So this is a question that has to be worked out.
Madam, I would like to ask about the modern Indian history. Our modern Indian history is written by the Britishers. Britishers in their economic interest and their political interest, British Englishers. And others say that it is the Brahminical domination of Indian history. Brahminical version of Indian history. One say that it is by the Britishers, and others say it is by the Brahminical version. What is your opinion on it?
Well, you're referring to colonial history writing. All right. There are two kinds of issues involved. One is, who did they consult as their sources? What did they consult as their sources? Yes, they consulted largely Brahmanical literature, because the learned Brahmins whom they consulted said, these are the only texts you need to know. So to that extent, it was heavily influenced by Brahmanical thinking. But the other side is that there was colonial policy involved in the writing of history, which had little to do with Brahmanism, it had to do with colonial policy. And that was theories like, for example, James Mill, who talked about Hindu nation and Muslim nation, and the antagonism between the two. So that this notion of the possibility of Hindu nation and Muslim nation is a colonial contribution. And it doesn't have to do with Brahmanical influence, it is entirely colonial policy. So you have to look at it in terms of What did they write influenced by Indian opinion, and what did they write which was conducive to their own policy of governance?
To add to that, while I was looking into the story of map making of India, I was looking into the British stories of map making during the 17th, 18th centuries. All I could get was that the British version of that history, cartography in India.
Sorry, which is where you are?
Cartography in India. And no literature by an Indian is available for me. Is there some way by which I can overcome this? No story from Indian side I could get. Then I had to read between the lines how Indian labor was exploited, how they were used both physically and intellectually for the map making of India.
Well, you know, cartography is not something that we Indians thought of. We didn't have maps. Let's be very clear about that. We had what are called landscape pictures. Like you would have a narrative about going from a town to a place in pilgrimage. And along the route, whatever you pass, they made little drawings of it. That's not cartography. Cartography is essentially a European development and a Chinese development. The Chinese had some cartography. The Arabs had a little cartography, and it's not quite clear as to what the sources of this cartography was. But as a developed discipline, it is a European discipline. And the maps that they made after Ptolemy's projection, which they threw aside, the maps that they made, especially in the late 16th, the 17th, and the 18th century, are all based on projections made by European geographers, Mercator and people like that. So the maps that they made of India and the surveying that they did in India was all based on European surveying. But we had no alternative. We had no surveyors, we had no maps. So what were they to use? They had to use their own maps and their own surveyors.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. May I ask you a question? Ma'am, ഇവിടെ മൗര്യമ്പർ ഡിക്ലൈനിൻ്റെ കാരണമായിട്ട് ഡിക്ലൈൻ്റെ സമയത്ത് ഈ എക്ട്രോജനസ് സെക്സിന് ആ ഒരു വലിയൊരു അടി കിട്ടി. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ നമ്മുടെ ബ്രാഹ്മണിക്കൽ റിലീജിയന് അതൊരു എന്താ പറയുക അതൊരു കുറച്ച് ഗ്രോത്തിന് കാരണമായോ? അതായത് മൗര്യമ്പർ ഡിക്ലൈൻ ഉണ്ടായ സമയത്ത്, അതായത് നമ്മുടെ എക്ട്രോജനസ് സെക്സിന് ഒരു താഴ്ചയും അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഈ ബ്രാഹ്മണിക്കൽ റിലീജിയന് ഒരു അപ്ലീസ്മെന്റ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മൂവ്മെന്റും മുകളിലോട്ട് വന്നോ എൻ്റെ അഭിപ്രായം.
I don't know that there was any major economic reason for the decline of the Mauryas. I think the reasons were much more political, in the sense that I think that the administration was not as centralized and as severe as we had thought. There wasn't a rise there wasn't a rise of Brahmanism after the Mauryas. Sorry, don't go by dynasties. There is the Kanva dynasty and the Shunga dynasty, but they are simply incidental. Remember that Pushyamitra was the commander-in-chief of the Mauryan army. He was not performing Vedic rituals. He was performing a very secular function. So you can't talk about it as the rise of Brahmanism. It is certainly the rise of a couple of Brahmins who founded families, and it didn't last for very long. It's not till the Gupta period that you really get the rise of Brahmanical thinking, acting, behavior, and so on. And what is very interesting is that after towards the end of the Mauryan period, that is the 2nd century BC, there's a huge spurt in commerce and trade, and the main economy is commercial and trading. So you really have to look at that for answers.
First of all, dear best to see you. My question is connected with the Mauryan Empire. You wrote many things about Mauryan Empire. Then Mauryan Empire was the first empire, and many progressive development happened during Mauryan period. Then why nationalist historians called Gupta age as golden age instead of Mauryan age?
There's a very simple answer to that, which is that the nationalist historians were deeply impressed with Brahmanical culture. And Brahmanical culture, after a long period of Buddhist cultural domination, in the Mauryan period, in the post-Mauryan period, Brahmanical culture comes to rise in the Gupta period. So they associate the Gupta period with the better period, because Buddhism anyway had died out in India. At the same time, we mustn't forget two contradictory things about the Gupta period. It is a period of tremendous literary, philosophical, artistic advance. No doubt about that. It is, to that extent, it is a brilliant period, can be coordinated. It is also the period that intensifies the exclusion of what is called the avarna as well. The caste rigidity also seems to get intensified in the Gupta period. So when we talk about the Gupta period as a golden age, we have to see it in the background of a lot of Buddhism, which is gradually pushed out and Brahmanism takes over. And we have to see it in this contradictory way of producing certainly aspects of a golden age, but at the same time being unethical socially.
Ma'am, I have one question. This is regarding the education system. So around 1000 AD, when our Nalanda and Takshashila tried to decline, we see that that is exactly the time around which the English universities, the church universities started coming. So I have two parts to the question. One, how do you look at the education system after the fall of these centralized universities in India? And what do you think would have happened to Indian education had those Nalandas and Takshashilas continued for maybe a few hundred years more?
I'm afraid you have to blame Brahmanism for the decline of these Buddhist universities, because there was a lot of conflict and debate and hostility between the Brahmins and the Buddhists. Certainly if universities or monasteries like Nalanda had continued, I think there would have been a very much even more rich philosophical tradition and educational tradition. No question. The importance of dissent in intellectual life is crucial. And as long as you keep on having dissent and contending argumentation amongst philosophers, that's fine. But the moment that dissent is silenced, then your philosophy becomes a little stagnant. And I think it would have been much richer if the descent had continued later on as well.
Ma'am, I heard out that, so I would like to share that we have learned that Raja Ram Mohan Rai put an end to Sati.
Not my period, I'm not answering questions on Raja.
And my question is that it is the duty of the historian. How did that custom come into our culture? Can you answer that question? Is it not the duty of the historian?
Oh yes, but a lot of historians have answered that question. I'm sorry, you know, I don't know if you're a historian, but but you should read what historians have written. I know, but this is precisely my point, that people don't read what historians have written. There's been a lot of writing on sati and the suppression of women, and especially since the 1980s, there's been a lot of writing, and I think the public should be made familiar with it. I mean, why does this custom come in? Partly, some people explain it as ritual, that when a man dies, which is the biggest sacrifice that can be made, his wife joins him on the funeral pyre. But in fact, many of us have been arguing that it is an indication of the desire to suppress women. And how do you suppress women maximally? By saying that when your husband dies, you will also have to immolate yourself. That is straightforward. It is a suppression of women. And what is interesting is the studies that have been carried out is which categories of society are the categories in which sati is most prevalent. And it's generally the dominant castes. There are a few exceptions, but generally it is the dominant caste that practices sati. So that gives you an answer as to why it was prevalent. It was not prevalent, but why it existed. And there's also, by the way, there's a regional distribution, in the sense that, for example, if you count the number of sati memorials, the maximum number are probably in Rajasthan and Gujarat and those areas, as compared to, for example, Bengal and South India. So that's a big question. Why is it more prevalent in some areas as compared to others?
So, ma'am, here. This sir. My question is about the openness in making the archaeological evidences available for historical research within the text. Making archaeological evidences, because there is a lack of openness in the Kiladi matter happening in Tamil Nadu.
Sorry, I don't understand what you mean by openness.
By the government, we suspect the foul play by the central government in making available the archaeological evidence for historical comparison with the text and the archaeological evidence.
No, the thing is that whilst an excavation is going on, there's nothing to stop you from going to the site and seeing what is coming out. The interference comes at the level of the report. When the report is written of an excavation, if there is interference, that is the level at which it will be reflected. Now there you have to hold the archaeologist responsible. Is the archaeologist allowing an interference in the writing of his report? Oh yes. Well, I mean, you know, this is for the archaeologists to take up and fight for it.
My, my question is regarding your point of syndicated Hinduism. Can we confine this point of syndication of syndicalism into syndication to Hinduism? All religions, including Islam, especially in Kerala, had undergone such a transformation in colonial and post-colonial state. And how you comment on that?
Look, there are two aspects to religion. One is a personal aspect. Who you worship, how you worship that person, what form it takes, what you expect, that's your personal business. It's your private business. The other is the public aspect. The public aspect has always existed in every religion that is of any size and has a role to play in society. And it is the attempt by religious groups to move in and to control the institutions of society. How they do it is another matter, has to be seen. Now, I think that Hinduism, in a sense, has had this. That there have always been institutions that have controlled society, and there has always been, obviously, a public aspect to it. One of the important things one has to keep in mind is that Hinduism, according to me and a few others, has never been a monolithic religion, in the sense that you've never had a situation where they've said all Hindus must believe in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the commandments, the creed, that kind of thing. And you've never had a situation where it's all Hindus must agree with what a particular advisory council, like the Vatican, is saying. Various things like that. And this was because Hinduism was always a collection of sects. If you disagreed with the religion as it was being practiced, you were free to go and form your own sect and your following and so on. And if you became big and important, you formed a separate sect. Otherwise, you faded out. Okay. This is the first time that an attempt is being made to bring all these sects together, anybody who calls himself or herself a Hindu, into one system with these questions which you have to believe in. You have to say that I agree to doing this, this, and this. And being controlled and governed by a body of people who are speaking in the name of Hinduism. That is why I call it syndicated Hinduism.
Yeah, now I think it is almost time. Now I have the privilege of asking the last question perhaps. Now, as knowledge is increasingly becoming the contested subject, and then we have two groups. One group in India, the Orthodox, believing that everything is there in the Vedas, and then you don't have to go to any science whatsoever. And another group saying that no, there was nothing in India, and then everything came from the West and so on. And then see some people, without having adequate knowledge base in intellectual history of India, just become fanatic about it. They do not know how to enter into a relationship of the kind of academic argument that Professor Sandra and Thapar has been elaborating through various ways. Now, my question is it not time for us to concentrate more and more on the intellectual history of early India, just to be very sure about what exactly has been the contribution of India to the domain of knowledge. And then we become really equipped about it. And then I think either side, then there would be a kind of lessening of the intensity of dogmatism, because automatically it has to become a relationship of cognitive encounter. Theory of doubt, methodological preoccupation, about knowledge production. But other people saying everything came maybe it will be.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree basically that, you know, we do have a tendency. It's of course much easier to say everything was known. Nothing is new. It was all known and it was known in the old days. We have to go back to the old days and it'll all be there again. This is not the case at all. This is not the case because all knowledge has a context. All knowledge is based on the particular context of that time, and it's argued out and it continues, and that argument should continue right up to present day and in the future. That is necessary. I agree that I think there should be much more discussion of the intellectual history of the past, which is missing because people tend to either dismiss it by saying it was, oh, this is all known, we don't have to go into it, or deny it completely. But it's the nature of knowledge in the past which is important. And the nature of knowledge which is different from India, different from China, different from Europe, and so on. But I agree entirely that I think that the time has come for a tremendously expanded, extended study of the intellectual history of not just ancient India, but of history right the way through to now. Because it's only then that we will understand where we are at now and how we have got to this point, which we need to understand. We need to understand it very badly because I think a lot of people, out of complete ignorance of what the background is, make statements which get taken up and become public statements and which are really very harmful to society. So yes, I think intellectual history is one of the answers. It's a question of which of you young historians are going to pick up intellectual history and start doing it.
I'm sure that you all agree with me that we had an hour of extremely enriching time. We all are indebted to Professor Thapar for that. Thank you very much.
ഈ സെഷനിലൂടെ അവസാനിക്കുകയാണ്.